Many outstanding fighter pilot achievements may seem almost unbelievable, but once you have learned how they accomplished these victories and the system they used, you'll realize it's just a trick of the trade, carried out by fighting men with the ability and know-how that it takes to win aerial battles. This picture is designed to take the mystery out of how our VF pilots knock down enemy fighters. It's something you've got to learn, because while destroying enemy fighters is seldom your primary mission, it's a vital part of your job in protecting our bombers and torpedo planes, and in clearing the way for destruction of the enemy's attacking bombers and torpedo planes. Enemy single-seaters are your toughest competition. Usually they'll be about on a par with your own equipment. Small ships, very fast and maneuverable. You have to fight them with your head, using your judgment, your skill in plane handling, and your superior gunnery to turn the odds in your favor. In fighting another fighter, you have to make the handling of your plane practically automatic and concentrate on watching the enemy. You haven't time to think about flying a plane. You have to spend all your time flying a bullet. Complete your checkoff list before you go into action. Your enemy isn't going to give you time out to fumble for a gun switch or adjust a stabilizer once he knows you're around. In fighting fighters, it's a matter of life insurance to make every split second count. The fighter is smaller and a higher speed target than any other combat plane. Therefore, it's doubly important for you to get the pipper in the right place. You're not going to be able to stay on the target long, so you'd better be right on your lead. What's more, you can't just put your sights on a Jap Zero or a German 190 and let go. You have to hit a fighter in the most vulnerable spot, or he'll stay right in the game with you. The engine, the pilot, and the fuel and oil tanks are the fighter's vitals. Aim for the engine. It's the largest vulnerable part of the target, and it comes into range first. Allowing for lead, use the engine as a bullseye and pour your shots in there. As the lead drops back, you'll naturally hit the other vital spots. It is important to gain initial advantages through position on the enemy. Altitude is your wealth. Never spend it unless it buys you speed or advantageous firing position. Whenever you can, launch an attack out of the sun. You also gain the element of surprise when you can strike from out of the clouds on an unsuspecting enemy. The gunnery approaches used against multi-placed aircraft are modified somewhat when you're up against fighters. The head-on is not the best, because it gives the enemy an equal opportunity to shoot it out with you. And why give him an even break? The side approach can be changed into a variety of attacks against enemy fighters because their firepower is concentrated forward. Against a fighter, you can start a quarter approach and finish up on the tail. Or you can start a run off the target's nose and pull around close behind him. The fighter is the only plane against which the stern approach is preferable to all others. You get an almost no deflection shot at him, and he can't shoot back. All he can do is keep turning to try to get out of your gun sight, and when he does, you match every turn, firing a short burst when you know you're on. The steep overhead approach used against multi-placed aircraft is also modified in fighting single-seaters. Start it, if you can, with about a 2,000-foot altitude advantage. When you make an overhead attack against a plane of superior performance, delay your rollover a little and flatten your dive. Use your diving speed to break away sharply and recover out of his range. When the enemy has about the same performance as your plane, you can delay an overhead run still further, making your dive even flatter. And instead of breaking away, you can stay right on his tail. If he turns aside to make you overrun, you can swing to the outside of his turn, slip into the saddle position, and still stay on his tail. But if you swing too wide, there is danger that he'll reverse his turn, get you in a scissors, and meet you head on. Once you have mastered these approaches, you are a menace to the enemy from any position. But above all, don't be overconfident. Never underestimate your enemy. Don't attack recklessly. Many a fighter has started diving on an enemy, fat, dumb, and happy, only to find that there were enemy planes above, just waiting for him to go after the decoy so they could pounce on him. Before you attack, make sure there are no bandits 6 o'clock up. Don't fall for the enemy's tricks. More than once, a fighter pilot has seen a dogfight off in the distance and rushed in alone to try to help out a pal, only to find that the fight was staged by 2 enemy planes just to slicker him into unequal combat. Watch out for tricks like this. Sometimes they work. Don't try to dogfight unless you are sure you can outmaneuver the enemy. If you can't turn inside his turn, this is what happens to you. If he can execute a high wing over inside yours, this is what happens to you. And if you suddenly find yourself in this position and try scissors with him, eventually he'll get on your tail and cut you down. The best way to beat this fighter is to start at least 2,000 feet above, barrel on in, shoot him, break away sharply in the blind spot beneath his wing so he can't see you until you are out of his range and away. There are defensive tactics to use against an enemy with superior maneuverability, and you will see how they work in the following picture of this series. Unless you have a superiority in numbers, you should get altitude advantage before starting an attack, even against an inferior fighter. If you are behind the enemy and he doesn't see you, it's a simple matter to push over into a dive and get on his tail. If he turns under you, do an opposite overhead. If he tries an Immelman, pull up and shoot him on his back, or do a high wing over above him and get on his tail before he can recover. The idea of plane against plane combat is very romantic of World War I ever dreamed. The keynote of fighter tactics in the United States Navy today is teamwork. Teamwork, coordination, cooperation, call it what you will, gives the fighter its greatest value in escorting bombers and torpedo planes on their missions, in enabling fighters to protect other fighters, in winning engagements that may mean the losing or the saving of a carrier. Teamwork begins with the 2-plane section, and its pilot should concentrate on working together, even against a single enemy fighter. If the enemy plane is approaching and you and your wingman are above and unseen, it is a simple matter to do opposite overheads in quick succession, reaching effective range, breaking away and recovering in bracket formation for a second attack if it should be necessary. If the attacking formation is split, the enemy is trapped even more tightly. He has to turn toward one of the fighters who accepts this head-on attack, while his partner winds on in to the saddle position. When your section is above and ahead of the target, side approaches can be made, keeping the enemy in the middle so that he can't run out and escape. If he turns toward one of you, the other is on him like a flash. It is frequently effective for one pilot to make a feint toward the enemy, drawing his attention and keeping him occupied, while his section mate comes in for the kill. Teamwork is even more vital when the section goes in to make an attack on two enemy planes. It is a cardinal rule of offensive combat to concentrate the attack of both fighters on the enemy wingman. If you are above the enemy on an opposite course and unseen, you can both make overheads, breaking clear and regaining altitude. The same principles apply to attacking from a split formation. The two planes work as a team, centering their attention on one objective, the wingman. When that enemy is eliminated, they attack the other target. If the enemy is approaching on an opposite course, turn and wind in from both sides, keeping the target bracketed and dropping on his tail. You are in position to maintain the offensive, knocking off first the wingman, then his mate. When your section is above and ahead of the targets, you can keep the enemy under control by using side approaches. If your target turns right or left, either you or your teammate is a cinch for an easy tail shot. If the enemy planes separate, don't break your formation and start chasing both of them. Come down on the high man, shoot him, and then go after the second target. The enemy is going to be desperate and open up his bag of tricks. There are a lot of things he can do, and don't worry, he'll do them. But the thing to remember is this: if your fundamentals are right and your section works as a team, it doesn't matter what the enemy tries, you've got him. It cannot be overstressed that the section must function as a unit. Working together, its two planes can bracket. They can concentrate double firepower on one target. They can deliver quick successive thrusts on the same principle as the 1-2 punch. And they can give mutual protection. Don't think of a section as two planes, but as a single combat unit. It's like baseball. You don't think of 9 men, you think of a team. It will help you if you bear this in mind: a section can always lick two planes. Two sections comprise the team or division. Its success depends largely on maintaining an effective tactical concentration. This doesn't necessarily mean a follow-the-leader routine, but it does mean that the planes are following a definite plan or pattern, which might physically separate them, but tactically they are a unit. There must be no straggling, no grandstanding or lone wolfing, because the lone wolf usually turns out to be a lost sheep. Each fighter must concentrate on his division leader, supporting his movements in every possible way. Some units attain such proficiency in their teamwork that the pilots can actually anticipate their leader's movements before he indicates them by any signal. Position of planes in division formation will vary. They may fly in a tight echelon, or the sections may be spread so as to give each other tactical support while still able to get into position for attack. The attack must be direct and rapid, with the enemy's wingman as the original point of attack. If the enemy is in echelon, fire is concentrated on the last man. If the enemy is in V formation, the two wingmen are attacked simultaneously. The sections of the division attack in succession, firing short bursts and breaking clear, zooming to regain as much of the original altitude advantage as possible. If two enemy sections are under attack simultaneously, the higher section is attacked first, and fire is concentrated on it until all are destroyed. Then and only then is the lower enemy section subjected to attack. If the lower section moves out of the enemy formation and attempts to climb above the attackers, one or more sections of the attacking group moves in on these detached targets while they still have the altitude advantage. Usually, one division will remain as top cover to act as lookout and make sure that no enemy plane gets up on top. Thus, by successively dropping on the enemy and recovering at the original altitude, the fighters create a sort of a rotary mower that cuts down the enemy, starting with the highest target and continuing until all opposition has been destroyed. Never let it work. A tactical chain must be maintained throughout the attack. If a fighter leaves this chain, he is leaving an opening for the enemy to get on a teammate's tail. Breaking the chain causes the flight commander to lose tactical control, and the fight degenerates into a melee of individual dogfights. 1918 model. Attack in sections, in divisions, or in squadrons. The fundamentals of their offensive combat tactics are the same. Coordinating a fighting squadron, like a pro football team, means the individual members must first learn to work together. Results will come only from constant and rigorous practice. Let's see how a carefully trained carrier fighting squadron does one of its jobs.
Fighter pilots, man your planes.
Two 12-plane flights of fighters are launched to form a combat air patrol. Flight A takes greater altitude than Flight B. They sight the enemy formation. A bomber squadron with a fighter escort. Flight A divides. One 4-plane team remains aloft as top cover. The other two divisions split for an attack on the fighters. As they approach the enemy, Flight A moves out ahead of Flight B. The division leaders carefully move into position for attack. The flight leader signals and peels off. The enemy fighters turn toward their attackers, leaving their bombers as cold meat for Flight B, which makes a direct assault. But that's a different phase of the battle. Meanwhile, Flight A is going to work on the enemy fighter formation. The flight leader constantly watches the enemy throughout the maneuver in order to be sure of maintaining the offensive. Each plane follows closely the next ahead, making its attack and rendezvousing for another. As the last plane of the 1st Division makes its attack, the leader of the 2nd Division follows close behind. That rotary mower is at work here, knocking them down one after another. Some of the enemy fighters break clear and try to gain altitude. The team immediately focuses its attention on them as soon as they become the high target. Tempting stray planes are ignored by the men of this team, for they dare not break their tactical chain. They keep the enemy under almost constant fire until all have been destroyed or driven off. High above, the top cover team has hovered over the battle in support of their teammates, ready to pitch in if necessary. But it wasn't, and the team returns with a decisive victory under its belt. Exciting? Yes. Amazing? Well, not to the men who make up the teams. Those lads have learned their homework well. They followed the ABCs of combat tactics of fighter against fighter. They gained and maintained altitude advantage. They made approaches which enabled them to bracket and get behind the enemy. They applied combat concentration in their attack delivering successive blows to the enemy while maintaining a tactical chain. So they fought as an organization, affording one another smashing offensive power. The result was a quick accomplishment of their primary mission, the destruction of enemy aircraft.